Hi team, so right now we're going to be going over how to remove the charging port on a Nintendo Switch. This also applies to the Switch Lite and probably most of the charging ports you're going to encounter. We do use similar methods. The only thing that may potentially change will be your temperature and air settings. And that's something you'll learn as you get more experience in micro soldering and learn how to utilize your tools better. So for now, let's work on the Switch. So the first thing you always want to do is um, you want to use your low melt solder, which would be the 138. You can use the same one you use for the iPhone, Samsung's, any other device. You're going to grab your Amtech 559 flux. You're going to put some in the anchor holes. And one thing I do like to do is lower that melting point with some low melt solder. So the factory solder tends to melt at it has a higher melting point. And you want to make sure that you lower that melting point so you're not, overheating the board, floating components, and possibly causing an additional short. That is the particular reason why we do this. So you're going to grab your tip, you're going to add some of this low melt solder to each joint, the anchor holes, which are the hardest part. Now we add it to the anchor holes and the tips and the little pins back here to lower again that melting point. The ground points tend to take a lot more heat, so the lower the melting point on those, the better, right? And go. So now we got that. You're gonna add just a bit more flux. There we go. Don't be afraid to add the flux you need to. At the end of the day, you are gonna be cleaning this up. So now we're gonna have our air settings at 400. Temperature and the airflow at 100. You're also going to be using your biggest tip on your hot air station, or not, like it's not going to be open nozzle, but a bigger tip, big enough to cover the whole area. Let me show you. See how that tip is bigger and it covers mainly the port. So you want to come from the outside, little by little. You're going to get closer and closer and closer. Make sure you're keeping your hot air on the port and nothing else. And you can put your tweezers in here. And now we're closer, we're closer, we're closer. And you see how the anchor holes at the bottom, they look a little shiny. That means that these could be starting to be ready to pull. When I start getting like all shiny, that means it's melting. It's reaching that point. What you want to do is you want to keep moving your air, moving your air. Keep moving it, moving it, moving it. And you want to just kind of like bide your time a little bit. There we go. Eventually this will come off. Sometimes you might need to use longer tweezers just because it does get a little bit warm. And come back. Again, you want to wait to see it get shiny, shiny and shiny, and you see how it's coming off? So easy. There you go. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Nothing too difficult. And you want to come in, you want to add again more flux. And what I personally like to do is I like to come in with my low melt solder and touch up all those pads. So what we're going to do is our goal is to get rid of the factory solder. There you go. Now the next step to completely get rid of that factory solder is to grab your wick, the braided wick, and you are going to push through here. You can clean up the anchor holes. The anchor holes are going to be the hardest part to clean just because they are ground, so they suck up a lot more heat than they need to. So I'm going to show you my trick in just a second. Clean those guys up. There we go. Want to make sure you're using your biggest tip. And this will suck up as much as you can. Okay. One minute. Now, if you're OCD like me, you're not going to want those top anchor holes full of solder. You're going to flip them over. And you're going to come in the back as well and do the same thing. Sometimes that does a trick. If it doesn't, I'm going to show you guys how I do it. What you want to do is you want to grab your wick. You're going to put it on the hole. You're going to put a little bit of flux on it. Very important. Go. A little flux. You're going to grab your tweezers. And you are going to hold this bad boy up in just a sec. Make sure you're always removing any dirty portion or used up portion of your wick. So you want to grab it like this with your tweezers. And this could take a little time to master depending on your skill set or how quickly you pick it up. You go. See? You kind of put it right there. It's going to like absorb it like a sponge almost. You want to make sure they're as even as possible. Same thing on this side. Point it at it so it absorbs. You don't want to do what I'm doing, which is twitching too much. There we go. Now that those holes are cleaned up, nice. This one right here. Make sure they're nice and even for when you put in your brand new, should be good enough. Now we're going to clean them. You're going to grab your 99% isopropyl alcohol. You're going to clean. If you hear a sizzle, don't worry. It's not hurting the board, I promise you. Clean off all that flux, because there's nothing worse than opening a board and seeing old flux in it. You can tell a lot about someone's skill level depending on the amount of flux that they have left behind. And also depending on the kind of flux that you use, it can be a little conductive. So if you're using cheap flux and you're leaving it behind, what's going to happen is it could cause a short because it's going to connect or make inappropriate connections. So when in doubt, just clean it up, right? We're going to clean up this front section as well. It's also very important to clean the flux as it's warm. It's a lot easier to clean up versus if you wait like, you know, a few minutes and it starts to harden. Then you have to come with your hot air gun, make it warm again, and clean it. So clean as much as you go, as much as possible. So clean as you go, as much as you can. And what I use for cleaning, again, is my 99% isopropyl alcohol and Q-tips. Usually at the end, what I do too when I'm done with the job is I grab a little cloth like this one, small toothbrush, and I just put some like this, cover it, and scrub. Just make sure I've gotten as much as I can off. And then once you do that, then blow hot air it or air it up a little bit. It looks so much neater and cleaner. Anyway, so that's kind of how we go over cleaning the board. So as you can tell, there are no rip pads, thankfully. Anchor holes are clean. There's no rip pads. Perfect. So now what we're going to come around and do is, I know it sounds counterproductive. I know. We're going to fill up the anchor holes and the pins. But here is the trick. We are going to be filling up the anchor holes with 138 solder. Actually, no, let's do 183. We're going to do 183 solder. So here's the trick. So I use 183. So you fill it up. We're going to use something similar to the hot swap method. All right. Usually the hot swap method is you would have just dumped the new port, prepared, no cleanup, no nothing, right? You're going to fill up the holes right here with your 183. Particularly, I like to use 183 is because it's sturdier. It doesn't oxidize as quickly as 138, but it does have a higher melting point. So you have to be cautious with this. There you go. And now on the top row of pins, you're going to apply the 183. Now the reason for this as well is, here's the catch. We use 183 in the top row and 138 on the bottom row. The reason I do this is because your port itself will act like a shield. You see how this is metal right here? So this would cover all these bottom pins. So it'll act like a shield. So when you're heating it, if the top row is receiving all the heat, and it'll connect first with the top row from here. So these blend in first, but then what happens a lot of times is that you don't realize that this section hasn't melted and made the connection. So you see it drop and you're like, oh, it's good to go. And you pull out, but then you don't have it charging both ways, or it doesn't charge with at over 5 volts. So the trick here is lower the melting point of these guys and use a higher melting point of these guys up here. So when these guys have already dropped and melted, you know that these guys are officially good to go. Now that is a pro tip. So now we're going to grab our new port and we're going to prep it. And I'm going to show you how we prep our new port as well. Okay, so here we have our new port. So now what we want to do is the following. Can I add a little bit of flux? And you're going to add the flux to the leggings, right? And again, you're going to grab your 138. And on the back row, you're going to apply some of it. There we go. Don't worry, we get a little flux in there, because you could always come in with your solder wick and remove some of that excess. Go. Yeah. And you reach it in. Perfect. And you make sure there's no bridges. No bridges. Perfect. Now, for the next part, you're going to do the same thing, but with your 183. I'm going to come around, put some on your tip, and we're going to keen these bad boys up. Here we go. You want to make sure that it looks almost like a little tail at the end. I don't know if you can tell. So what I like to do is do like a little tail or a little spike at the end. So when it catches, it kind of blends in. Now what you also want to do is you want to tin those legs, or at least I do. That way when the anchor hole drops, it's nice and solid. A little flex on those legs. And or you could also come in directly like this. There you go. Beautiful. Now the legs are tin and everything is tinned. And if you want, you can clean it up a bit. Not gonna hurt you. Make sure you're gentle with it when you're cleaning it. You want to bend any of the little legs back there. Perfect. Make sure there's no flex in there. And that looks pretty clean inside too. Perfect. So now we have a nice clean port ready for install. So we're going to come in. Here is the easy part, depending on who you ask. You're going to want to see how lined up your port is, right? So come in. You're going to more or less try and line it up. Now you know, okay, more or less here is how it's going to drop. Line it up as best as you can. There we go. So what you want to do now is you want to come in with your 365, 65 air, right? You're going to start hitting it from far away. And you're going to come in closer and closer. You see how it dropped already? Make sure you line those up as properly as you can. There you go. You see how that dropped? Don't be afraid to pull out. Grab a longer set of tweezers if you need to. There we go. And you push them down. Push them down. You keep holding. You count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you pull out and you keep holding. Keep holding and you keep holding and you keep holding. And one more thing you could do is for safe measure. You gotta come back here. Now make sure that these pads are all nice and tinned in there. Come back with our hot air. I'm gonna give it a second session. Wait for it. I want to make sure that these are all nice and joined together. Go. And you pull out again, and you just keep holding. And then you could probably tilt it a little bit like this. You want to make sure that all these guys are making contact. And then you just want to be OCD. You can always come by and just make sure that they are nice and connected. See how that one got a little too connected? I'm gonna fix that right up, don't you worry. Usually for this, a smaller tip is recommended, so you don't end up with a solder blob like I did. So what you want to do, you want to come in, add a little bit of flux, clean your tip. Or you can always just grab some solder wick, as we know, and there, problem solved. Whenever you feel like you have excess solder somewhere, you can always add a little flux and wick it. There we go. So now we're going to clean it up. We're going to make sure all those pads are nice and sturdy in there. Make sure that the port is clean inside too. Sure that those legs look good. Solid. So you just kind of gently try and move the legs. See how this one moves? This one's not completely solidified. And these two are not completely solidified. So what you do when they're not completely in there is you can always come back and touch up that specific leg. You can always, like, if you look at push down motion, this is why the smaller tip comes in handy, because you can just do like a press down motion almost. Think of it like ironing a shirt almost. Want to like press them down. As you're doing that, almost like ironing your shirt, right? Pressing down those tips. Come back in, clean it again. And we do the same thing again after cleanup. Solids. Kind of push to do the push motion. This one's still kind of weak. Weak. Okay. So in this case, what I'm going to do is another trick is you can flip it over like so. Okay, just a little bit more flux. So now that we have that portion done right there, see, they're still moving. It's much better. They're far more solid now. So let me show you what I mean. So again, we're gonna go poke, 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 poke. It's still moving. So that second to the left is still moving. So you want to come back again. Want to make sure that no pads are moving. Go. I'm going to clean up. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead, do our poke, poke, poke trick. No wiggle. No wiggle. Perfect. So far, so good. Yeah, there we go. Now they all passed the wiggle test. So whenever you're doing a port, remember that song that goes, "My money don't wiggle wiggle." So it should be like your money. It should not wiggle wiggle. And go. And so always cleaning up is important. So we're going to come back with our alcohol. And usually this can be a lot faster, but when you're nitpicking, like I am, it can take a little bit longer. And when you clean up this much, it can also extend the turnaround on your repair. But you also want to make sure that you are cleaning up after yourself, you know. I don't like seeing greasy boards, so I clean them to death, which makes everything a lot longer. Like I said, I don't like leaving flux residue. Like this particular board had already been worked on before and it had a ton of flux residue. So it's making it kind of difficult. And also a disadvantage is that in some cases you don't know what kind of flux the other location was using. You know, were they using Amtech 559 like we do, which is a super high quality flux. You know, we're using some cheap stuff from Fry's. You never know. Every tech is different. We use high quality stuff, and it should be reflected in your service and pricing. Okay. That looks great right there. Make sure this backside looks pretty good too. I'm gonna go ahead and clean this backside as well, just to be safe. There you go. That's looking a ton better, I think, compared to how it arrived. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the tester housing, and let's see how that works. Okay, so here is our housing. Let's see. Make sure all the cables are aligned properly. There we go. Now you want to start connecting stuff. This one's your backlight cable. So hard to do this with gloves. So, one more time, backlight cable. There you go. Need to make sure this one is also plugged in. This one's a tricky one, so you want to make sure that your LCD cable is plugged in all the way. A lot of times what occurs is that it doesn't go in all the way, you guys don't get image, and you think that there is another unrelated board issue, when in truth is this one's not plugged in all the way. Okay. And we have our coax connector antenna. That one goes right here. Actually, let's leave that one for last. One moment, please. All right, sorry about that, team. I'm gonna plug this one in also. Make sure they're all as far as they can go. Get that one connected. Is this one connected as well? Put this one in. And you close it. Your left speaker, that's connected now. You have this bad boy right here. And don't be afraid to move the board around as you need it. Remember, you have to be comfortable, not the motherboard. There you go. That's plugged in now. And one more coax antenna. There we go. I'm also going to connect this bad boy right here. Remember, as you're connecting things, if you feel just a little pushback, stop, try again. No need to force anything in there. So now we're going to put some of the screws back on it. So we have our side screws. So our charge port side screws, these guys. We have 1, 2. I'm going to work our way backwards from before. So we have our black screws, remember, one goes up here, one goes up here, boom, screw number 3, and screw number 4. Now, very important, you may have noticed that I left this section unplugged before putting the screws back in. So what I have found is that if you plug this in first and then you put the screw in, sometimes it shorts out this cable, which gives you an error and it makes the console go on a boot loop. So I'd rather just, instead of taking it apart again to unscrew it and put the screw in properly, I'd rather just put it in and then connect this speaker. So we have that portion good. Now we're going to get our fan. Fan goes right here. Also very important, on the original version or version 1 of the Nintendo Switch, there used to be what you call a little diode, and it was right next to the fan. And for some reason, that diode always burnt or just went bad for, again, no reason, and switches would stop working. So the solution to that problem is remove that diode. On version 2, Nintendo realized they did not need that diode, so they just removed it completely. So on newer versions, you'll see how there was the space on the board where it was supposed to be put in, but it's blank. It's not connected. So they revised it. So that diode was not needed. If anything, it was more of a pain in the butt, apparently, for them to be fixing. So we got that portion put in. Next is your SD card reader. Again, you need this for image and touch. If this is not connected, you're not going to get image and touch, and you're going to be panicking over why the Switch is not booting. You got one here at the bottom. And then these two go here at the top. Now, alrighty, so now we have those bad boys connected. This one right here is for touch. Also very important, if you ever plug in your Switch and touch is not working, make sure that this is either plugged in right, or it could also be this game card reader. So try a different one if you have one laying around. There you go. You have those bad boys plugged in. You have your heat shield. You gotta plug it in temporarily just out of habit. But before you plug it in every time, you always want to make sure you have replaced your dearly beloved thermal paste. In this case, we're just gonna plug it in, like I said, for testing purposes and out of habit. Okay, now that is all plugged in. Now we go ahead and plug in our battery. And then you're gonna grab your charging, your new charging cable or a charging cable. Very important. Make sure that for your charging cables, you're either using an original Nintendo Switch charging cable or something that gives you 20 volts and above, such as a MacBook original charging cable. You're gonna plug it in. Make sure your amp meter's on. You're gonna plug it in. hopefully gives you a reading. This one is not turning on at all, so it probably has additional issues that we're going to be looking into. Make sure you plug it in both ways. Yep, so this one may have an additional issue we need to look into, and that will be for another repair video. And that is how you basically do a Type C or HDMI port on a Nintendo Switch. Like I said, this particular model had a different issue, but we always start off with your most common denominator, which is the switch itself, or the port itself. Usually some damage will cause it to no charge. So now we're going to go down the rabbit hole and find out what the issue could be with this bad boy. If you guys have any other questions regarding Nintendo Switch teardowns or Nintendo Switch repairs in general, go ahead and drop it in the Discord group or DM us, and we'll go ahead and get you guys taken care of. We'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great weekend.